Hi everyone. I think I'm ready to go. I don't have a clicker, so I'm going to be walking back and forth between the screen and my laptop quite a bit. So, right, my name's Mike. Today I'm going to be talking about how we use the Umbraco API services to create some cross-platform user-generated content on a website called Run Together. So first off, a little bit about us. I work at a company called Yoyo. We're a Tunbridge Wells-based digital agency. We have most of our clients are on Umbraco, include people such as the RNLI, Young Minds, Firefly, England Athletics. Me personally, I've been a developer for about 7 years. I've been working at Yoyo for free. That's where I started working with Umbraco and .NET, so I've had about 3 years experience with that. I run 2 meetups, the Kent Umbraco meetup, which is every 4th Tuesday of the month, and the Front End Kent meetup, which is every 2nd Tuesday. So if you're in Kent or live around that area or know anyone in that area, do come along, it's always free. And if you ever want to talk, we're always looking. So before I get started, I want to talk a little bit about the actual client and the problem we're trying to solve for them. So Run Together, it's a website to replace an existing previous website called Run England, which was a website created by England Athletics, and it's a running initiative to help encourage people to run across England. There are quite a few parts of the site. I'm going to be focusing on 2 sections here. The first one is Run Groups. Now, Run Groups are an area where people can come to the site, they can create an account, and then they can sign up to these groups, and they can be taken out in sessions. Some of them are free, some of them are paid for. And it's, just so you can run in a safe environment. There's 2 sort of levels here. You've got your standard user, and then you've got your run leaders. And these are the people who actually create the groups. This is all community managed. And all this information is handled by a CMS. The second part I'm going to look at are run routes. Now, they're exactly what they sound like. They are running routes. But these have actually been checked and vetted by Run Together. They'll go out on site. They'll put down notifications and signposts. If you run in some places, you might have seen them around. I don't know. I don't run. So all of these combine. Now, the problem they wanted us to solve was when they first migrated this site over, they had about 500 run routes, and they're all handled from Umbraco. If they want to create a new one, they just go in, add the content, great, sweet. What they wanted was to give their run leaders the ability to upload their own routes so they can create some more. But they didn't want to give them access to the CMS. They wanted them to do it straight through their account section. So they can click on a button that says, submit a route. They'll have a form on the CMS side of it, and it will manage the route. And this creates a couple of problems. One, we need to create an API so they can actually do that. Another one is they wanted to give their run leaders the ability to preview these routes. Now, these can't go live straight away, right? These have got to be checked and verified. They've got to go out, put the signposts in, make sure all the information on there is correct. So there's got to be a verification process somewhere in there. So when these get pushed live or pushed to the site, they've got to go into a pending state where they can be previewed. Once they actually get approved, they still need to have the ability to update them without, again, just pushing that information live. So we need to preview them again without making another bit of content with the new bit of data, but without removing the live bits of content. So that's breaking down the problem into sort of 4 steps. We need to create an API with CRM. We need to give the API an accurate representation of our run route .type. This code does contain some, this talk does contain some code, by the way. So we have to convert our run route into a nice data model they can use, make an API, let them preview the changes, and create an approval system for Run Together. So the tools we're going to use, Umbraco API controller, content service, content type service, all of these give us the power to do what we need to do. Let's try to chuck in a couple of 80s references here. So looking at the first problem, converting our run route into an MVC form friendly data model. Now, what that means is when you've got your MVC forms, you want to make them dynamic. We can give them that data model in their HTML.input. It'll pass in, say, the title, and it'll automatically create that. Because we want to get an accurate representation of the run route, we need to find all the possible values that could exist on that route. So we need to figure out how to convert the doc type data into that. So here comes the code. So first off, we need to make this run route model. And this, you'll notice, are very basic values. You've got your integers, booleans, and then this list of select list items. That's always a pain to say. And they're sort of the main values that we want to create using the doc types. And when that gets sent across to the CRM, it's sent over as JSON, and it should look something like this. And then that gets passed into form, automatically created, sweet. So first things first, we want to make a data service, and then we want to make a reference to the content type service. Now, I'm not going to keep saying we make a reference to that. Just know that if you ever see a service, it's been referenced. So to do that, create a new version of the model. That will give us the default data, the default data. Then we actually want to get the run route. So we're going to use the content type service to get the document type, and it will give us an iContent. That will contain all the pre-values, all the bits of data that exist. At that level, we get the property groups, and the property groups translate to the tabs. So we've now got all the tabs that exist on the run route. Then we can go into that, and we can get the property types. So that's all the properties. So once we've got that, we have every single value that we need. We're also having the ability to pass in an existing route. It's because, one, we need to get them the default values so they can create a new form, but we also want to let them update an existing form. So we need to do both things. It makes sense to do it in the same place. So what we want to do first is make sure that the properties that exist on the run route actually match with what we've got on our model. And then we want to set the data in two different ways. The first one is going to be this data type. Now, we're going to look at the data type for values such as checkboxes and drop-downs and things like that. The reason why is if you just use the content service to get a value, that will just return you a comma-separated string of numbers, which isn't very useful for a creation of a form because it will just be blank. So we need to get all the possible values, and if any default ones have been checked, we need to know that. So for this bit, I don't know if he's here, but Matt Rigby had this blog post, and it's I found extremely useful to get the pre-values of things like select boxes and drop-downs. So yeah, I'm not going to go into what this explains, just know that it's very useful. So what we're going to do here is we're going to get the data type. So as an example, let's say get the terrain. There's lots of different options that a route could be. It could be grass, it could be dirt. So we need to find all those values. Once we get that, we'll get like the pre-values for that, and that is essentially grass. The ID is 2. Gravel, the ID is 3. So we need to get those two values. So when we set them later, we just give it a number, and it will set it. So we've now got all the values that exist on the terrain. We then want to create an iteration of that. Then we're going to check the value that we're looking at. It's the same as one of these, a checkbox list, a drop-down button list, and a drop-down. And if it is, then we create our new select list item list. Once we've got that newed up, we're going to start mapping that data. So we've now got a nice list of the checkboxes we need. Then we want to see if we're actually passing in that run route. If there is some pre-existing data, we want to check that data to see whether any of the currently selected checkboxes are in this value. So here, this is where we can set those true values. And then we add it to the list, and that's cool. We've now got all those long values for that. There's true, false, exactly the same. The weird thing with the true, false values is they don't return just a Boolean yes, true or false. They return the pre-values as well. So you've got to do it this way. That will also make sure that you get the correct default value as well. So that's those types of data contents. We're looking at the actual data type. The next bit is looking at the actual content of the run route doc type. So this will get us these sort of values. So your standard string values, if you're actually getting existing data, integers. Also node pickers. Now, if anyone's used node pickers, I'm sure most of you have, if you're getting that data back, the raw data will just be an ID of whatever that node picker is. That's not going to be very useful because how are they going to know what ID they're meant to give to set this value? So I'll get on to how we handle all this. So the first thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to do this a bit backwards. I'm going to look at what happens if we're not going to pass in an existing route. I'm going to go for the straight data, and we're going to look at this partners. I'll just quickly go over what partners are. Partners are a part of the website where companies such as the National Trust can contact run together and say, right, we want to sponsor one of your routes. And in doing so, on the route doc type, you'll select a partner, and you'll get a bit more information saying this is a National Trust route. Here's a link to the website or the microsite. And all the partners are actual contents on the doc type, in the tree. So we need to find all the available partners on the site at any one time, but these can change. So after a couple of months, National Trust may no longer be sponsoring it, or their contract's finished. They could add new ones. It could happen, it can change quite frequently. So we always need to get an accurate representation of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to, again, give them a list, create them a new list, give them an empty value, because they need the option to select no partners. Then we're going to use examine, and I'm not going to go into all the details of how examine works, but just know that we're looking for every single partner page doc type. And once we have that, we're just going to return a list, get the information we need, such as the ID of it, the name of it. We're going to put that into a little model so we can create a drop-down list. So we've got all our partners. We're then going to see if a route has been passed in. If it already has a partner selected, we need to get the ID. We also want to definitely make sure that that partner exists. So once we know that it exists, we can then start adding that to our as a selected option in our drop-down. So all this is still part of mapping that, getting that abstraction of the run route into this data model. We're nearly there. And that gets set. So the final bits are getting all the other values of an existing route. So what we're going to do here is we're going to ignore all of these values, and these are all things like drop-down stuff. That's handled by other one. We don't need to worry about that. Once again here, this is getting the partner values. It's interesting when I look back at this. Probably don't need to do this twice. I'm doing it when there's no routes. I could just do it every time. But it's always interesting to see how you could have done it differently. But the majority of it, it's just a one-to-one mapping. So you can get your title, pass it a string, and it will set, and so on. It's fairly simple. And that will give us something like this. So, all the default null values, all the selected options will be false. Not forget. This is just going to be a quick example of how it works with an existing route. So what we want to do here is pass in the ID of the route, make sure that the route they want to change exists, make sure that the person who created it, the person who wants to change it actually created it. We don't want anyone else to tamper with it. They're the only people who have control over it via this API. And then that will update it. The last thing we're going to do here is we want to return a full URL of this route that we're creating or working with, because it's going to be used as part of the preview system. And it's going to be the CRM, and their management of this is on a different URL, so we can't just give them like a / route. And that looks something like this. So we've now actually got some data in our model, and you can see things like that grass route is now selected, so that'll come through as such. Yes. That's probably the bigger, most mind-numbing part of the talk. Right. Then we're going to use the API controller, and we're going to create some endpoints. One thing to note is there's some authorization wrapped around this. If you're going to create an API for creating Umbraco, put some security around it. Otherwise, don't do it. It's as simple as that. I'm not going to go into how that works, because it's a whole different talk. Just know there's a lot of security, making sure that only the right people with the right access can do any of this. So that's our first problem solved. we've now given them an accurate representation of our doc type, and they can call that whenever they want. They can cache it, so they always have the right values for their form. Now we need to figure out what happens when we get that data back. So we're going to create this CRUD API. So we've already done the first part of this. We've created our gets. They can get the data from both a new route and an existing route. Helpful diagram, going the opposite way now. You ready for more code? Because we're going to need more code. So, the first thing we want to do with the code they send us is create a response model. We want to give them a useful response to anything they send us. So that's what we're going to do. And then we're going to validate the data. Because we've the wonderful world of C#, strongly typed, and we're giving it data annotations, is we can use the inbuilt validation to make sure that what they're giving us is actually correct. And if it's not, we can update our response message with the relevant information, and they'll get that straight away. It'll just stop there. Same with if they actually don't pass us anything, giving them useful information. After that, we want to check to see whether they're giving us a title. If you've ever tried to make a new bit of content in Umbraco without making a title, you'll know that it just doesn't work. It won't actually create it or error. So you need that. Right there. So then we're going to figure out whether this is going to be a pending route or an actual live route. Now, if this is a new route or editing a route, it's going to be a pending route. Now, the concept of route and pending is, well, kind of what it says. A pending route isn't going to be in the live site. It's not going to be searchable. It's actually, when it's new, going to live away from the main set of routes. So we want to find out the right folder it needs to live in. Now, we're going to use the content service to create our new bit of, that's what I mean about the two separate areas. So yeah, we're going to use the content service to actually create our new bit of content. So that's the fourth service we're using. And again, we've got two different doc types. One's a pending, one is a normal run route. Exactly the same, except they behave slightly differently in terms of search. So we've just created our first bit of content. We've given it a title, given it a location, given it a doc type. Now we need to actually set the data of this new bit of content with what they've sent us. So again, we're just going to check through the data they've given us, match it to the aliases that exist in the doc type in Umbraco. And then it's just a case of, once again, going through the values that they've sent us and using the set value, which is on the iContent. Now, because we do all that work to get the correct pre-values for that select list item list, it's very easy for us to actually get a comma-separated string of numbers to set values such as this, the drop-down checkboxes. That's what that does. And the majority of them is very simple, setting values one-to-one. We're not going to be touching the ID or the URL. That should be handled by Umbraco. We don't want to touch it, so we're leaving it. And again, with the partners, in the time that they have got the data to create a new route to the time that they send it back, we don't know whether that partner could have been deleted. So when they send that back, we're just going to do another check to make sure that it definitely does exist. And then if it does, we're going to do two things. We're going to set that node picker value, and we're also going to set this partner name. Now that's just a label in the back office, and it means that when they're looking at in the list view, they can organize it via the different partners that it might be associated, because not every route will have a partner. Again, it's a useful thing for the content editors to have. I've got time, so I'm just going to give you a bit of break from the bombardment of code. There we go. I wish I had some music to have this going. Does anyone remember these? Anyone have these as a kid? I went down a rabbit hole of finding lots of Japanese versions of this game after I found this. About an hour just watching people try to get to the end. Who ever completed this? Nice. I always got stuck at the bit that's just about to come up, that last bit where you want to hit the bell. There we go. Bing! Yeah, every time, too fast. That should have relaxed your brain a bit. Oh, not again. Okay. Next bit, we're going to look at this GPX file. Does anyone know what a GPX file is? Cool. 2 people, 3 people. For those of you that don't know, it's essentially a bit of XML that contains coordinate values. So it will create the actual route. Now, the reason why we're using GPX is all the legacy routes that we had use the GPX file. Google actually uses KML, same sort of thing. We do a bit of work, code behind the scenes that will convert the GPX file to KML, but they need to send us route information. But it's actually all sent as a big, long string in the form, so we need to create a bit of content. So what we're going to do here is create the GPX file. And in here, the first thing we need to do is create a temporary version of the file. So we're going to use just a standard bit of creating a directory, making sure it exists, all in the temp folder, and we're going to write it using the system.io stuff to a file. So that will create us just a temporary version of the GPX file. The reason why we're doing that is we need to make sure that the data in there is valid. So moving on, we create this get media folder will either create or get a new folder in the media library in Umbraco. So we now are going to use the media service to create our new bit of actual Umbraco media. We're going to give it the name, the ID of that folder we just created or got, set as a file, and then we're going to use the temporary file and the system, the file stream, to validate the XML. If it isn't valid, we're going to let them know in our response. If it is, it will get set to that file. Happy days. We can now delete that temporary file, save it to the media using the media service, and then we can get an ID, and then we can update our media picker, and we create our GPX file. Another thing to note is if this is an existing route and we're updating that route, we want to delete any previous GPX files. They map one-to-one. Each run route has its own route. So we know that if this is going to change, we don't need it. It's not going to be shared by any other route. So we can delete it and then set the new one. Next up is this pending. This is pending value is, again, going to be used for the approval process and the preview ability. So we set this, they do exactly what they say, hide it from the sitemap, hide it from the search. And if it is pending when they create it, like I said, it will go into this pending run routes folder. To let the Umbraco users, the content editors, approve these, we actually add a little bit to the publishing events so that when they go into the route, they've checked it out, they just uncheck that is pending, and it'll move it, this whole thing, just get down to here, and it will change the doc type, change the folder that it lives in into the main run routes folder, and that route will now be live. And that's sort of an approval process. We've just created our approval system. And that is pending thing will keep working. And it will only go one way as well. We don't want them to then check it pending and it moves back into the pending folder. Once it's in that live folder, it's there forever. Right. So that was creating a route. Now we're going to look at updating it. Again, we've done all the work to figure out what happens if you're updating an existing route. The thing to look at here is, again, we want to make sure that the person trying to update it creates it in the first place. And then if it's pending again, if they're making changes, we're just going to save it. We're not going to save and publish it. Again, this will be used for the preview later on. But so we know that the data is saved in the database, but people coming to the site aren't going to see any of the changes just yet. And then we create our endpoints using our data service, and we've only got one left, the delete run route. Now, this is actually just put into one nice, big, long slide that you probably can't read. But you don't need to concern yourself too much about the syntax. Just know that what we're doing is, again, making sure that route exists, making sure the user created it. If it has a GPX file, we'll get rid of it. It's not going to be needed anymore. Then we delete it and give them the appropriate response. And that's our delete. We've just created our CRUD system. I say just, it was quite a lot of work. But, you know, it's done. The last thing we need to do is this preview ability. So looking back to it, when it's first created, it will live in that pending run routes folder. It's fairly simple to give them a useful link that can only be found if you have that link. It won't appear in a search. But once it is live, as I said before, we can't move it back into that pending folder. We don't want to duplicate it. And that previous link will no longer exist. So what we did is on the actual route itself, if you pass in a query string of, say, preview, we then check to see if the user is logged in. Now, if the user is logged in and they have the right level, so they're a run leader, rather than using the iPublish content, we're going to again use the content service to get the data straight from the database. Now, this will get us the saved data rather than save and publish. So in that, we can have a live bit of content, but we can see the changes without them affecting. The reason why this is, again, all behind the security is we're accessing the database. Only certain people can get to this. Also, it's a bit more intensive because we're not getting it from the cache. And because it's on our actual run route, we've already got all the bits of code that maps all the data. It's just getting it from a different source. And that's how he handles the preview system. And that's pretty much it. There's one last thing I want to talk about is documentation. When we handed this API over, we wanted them to be able to use it really easily. That's also why we did that abstraction of the model to this, of the run route to the model. Because we want them to just easily be able to create it and send data back. They shouldn't really need to concern themselves with what Umbraco does. They're not Umbraco people. So, we did it in Markdown. We detailed every endpoint. With Markdown, we can give them links. We could say, right, this GPX file must be a valid bit of XML. It must be sent in the body. You can't send this massive bit of XML in the query string. It will just break. So all this is actually really useful, giving a concise bit of information to the developers who are going to be using it. So if you're ever making something like this, it doesn't have to be like this, but always think about how you're going to send the information of how it should be used. And that's me done. Any questions? I hope not. Cool. Once again, if you want to find information about the meetups I run, there's a Twitter for Kent and Frontend Kent, and that's my Twitter, Mike Masey. Thank you. You can all go eat now.